Hi, welcome to It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach with your host, Sister A. Legree. You can find out more about us by logging onto our website at www.igbatt.com or igbattmho.org. And I just wanted to come live briefly. We actually come every week, but we usually don't always go live. But I wanted to go live today since just to share something that I saw in the news. Okay. I saw in the news where it was 13 truckers helped Michigan police with a possible suicide. So there was a woman that was on the bridge in a particular state, and the police, along with 13 truckers, were able to assist this woman in getting help. And I think that's a great thing. But I wanted to kind of share a couple of things that when you see a person by the time a person gets on the bridge, or by the time a person decides to die by suicide, or by the time a person actually needs to is actively psychotic, there are usually signs and symptoms along the way that all of us. So the title of my broadcast is that we are all in this together. I think a lot of times we talk about, we hear about the police needing to they need better training. The police need better they need better training, et cetera, et cetera. I think we can't just put it all on the police. This is a society problem. This is a social problem. It's not just the police officers or the police system. Okay, when you look at individuals who have severe and persistent mental illnesses, so let me share a couple of definitions. So, when we talk about severe and persistent mental illnesses, we're talking about mental illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life. Um, in a severe way. Okay. So when we look at the definition, I want to make sure I get it right. It's actually on our website at igbatt.com. But a mental illness, a condition that impacts a person's thinking, feeling, or mood and may affect their ability to relate to each other, to others, and function on a daily basis. When we look at severe, so you look at mental illnesses are, let's just say, are here. Then we look at severe and persistent mental illnesses. They are just that. They are severe and they are persistent. We're looking at schizophrenia, for example, bipolar. So we're talking about, illnesses that don't go away. We're talking about illnesses that will require more than likely ongoing management, just like any other illness. When we talk about mental illnesses, we're talking about illnesses that impact the brain. And as a result of that impact, we can see changes in the thoughts, feelings, and the behavior. So when we talk about severe and persistent mental illnesses, schizophrenia and bipolar, one of the hallmarks is what we call psychosis. Now, people use that term psychosis, but when we're talking about psychosis from a mental health perspective, we're talking about the person is out of touch with reality. We talk about psychosis or the person is psychotic. So when we say a person is actively psychotic, that means they are actively out of touch with reality. We're looking at auditory hallucinations sometimes. So what we're looking at with the person has lost touch with the reality to the point where they may not realize that they haven't eaten. They may not realize that they need to take medications. They may not realize that, they've been up all night, or they're not sleeping properly, or they're not eating, as I just said. So it's just that a person's out of touch with reality. But before a person becomes actively psychotic, when we talk about in the case of severe and persistent mental illnesses, let me back up. You can see psychosis in other illnesses as well. You may see psychosis in what we talk about a drug induced psychosis, or in some other illness that you may see. But when we're talking about severe and persistent mental illness, such as schizophrenia and bipolar, psychotic or a person being psychotic out of touch with reality doesn't usually just happen like that. We usually can see it. So what am I saying? If you are a loved one or family member and you're living with someone who has schizophrenia or bipolar, you want to know that maybe or realize what their symptoms are first of all, and realize that being out of touch with reality or becoming psychotic or maybe having psychotic episodes is part of the illness. So, number one, how can we all be involved and help out our brothers and sisters? Number one, if you are a loved one and you are a friend, family member, loved one, and you are have a relationship with someone who has been diagnosed with severe and persistent mental illness, first of all, remember that that person may not always be actively psychotic. That's number one. Two, realize that with the medications for some people, all the symptoms may go away. And for some people, the symptoms may be small or not small, but they may be persistent, but not as severe. Okay, so you want to keep in mind that your loved one may or may not have to take medications for the rest of their lives, just like if they had diabetes, just like if they had hypertension or any other illness that will require long-term management. So number two, if you are the person who is living with a severe and persistent mental illness, I want you to understand that just like any other illness, this is an illness that has to be managed. It's not an illness. Severe and persistent mental illness comes in cycles, right? Or episodes. It may not necessarily go away completely. A person may be fine for a while, functioning pretty well, and then they may have another episode, especially in the case when we talk about bipolar. So they may have episodes. The episodes may be frequent or they may not be frequent. So if a person is diagnosed with a severe and persistent mental illness, you can't assume that just because they're doing well this week or this month that they don't have the illness, right? So you want to know that the illness is manageable. If you are a person who are living with a severe and persistent mental illness, we know that recovery is possible. What do we mean by recovery? Recovery doesn't necessarily mean the absence of symptoms, but recovery means that you're able to live the life where you're able to engage in life, you're able maybe to go to school, you're able to get married, you're able to do things that you were not able to do before. So recovery just means that you're at a point in your life where things are better and whatever that means for you. Okay, so you may not necessarily be symptom free for forever, but recovery is definitely possible. But part of recovery is being able to manage your illness, being able to manage that. What does that look like? Well, that's number one. Is if you get out of the hospital, if you happen to go to the hospital, make sure you follow up with your outpatient visits, making sure you take your medications, make sure you talk to your doctor, but also making sure that you have a life. Okay, because it's not just about always taking medication, seeing the doctor, seeing the therapist. It's also realizing that you are a person. God created you just like He created me with a wonderful purpose in mind. You may be diagnosed with schizophrenia. I may be diagnosed with hypertension. This person may be diagnosed with diabetes. So we may all have something that we have to manage. But some mental illnesses are manageable, are treatable. Severe and persistent mental illness are treatable. But one of the things we also have to do is become aware of what your relapse signs are, what your reoccurring symptoms are. So the reoccurring symptoms may be different from the relapse signs. Reoccurring symptoms are symptoms that you may have even despite taking medications, even despite seeing your therapist or your clinical social worker or your doctor. You may still have some reoccurring symptoms. Again, they may not be as severe, but they may be lower. So, for example, if you used to hear voices or have auditory hallucinations, you may have them, they may be like a mumbling, they may be much lower. So you may hear it, but not as bad as it was before, okay? You want to pay attention to your reoccurring symptoms because reoccurring symptoms can be triggered by stress. So what do we mean stress? Stress is anything, good or bad, that can cause a change, right? So stress could be getting married, stress could be having a child, stress could be starting a new job, stress could be losing a job. So whatever is stressful for you, it differs with different people. So you want to manage your stress and pay attention to it because what happens with reoccurring symptoms, they can become what do you call it? Not necessarily triggers, but they can make you aware. They can alert you for when things are starting to change. Okay, so when we talk about reoccurring symptoms, if you notice that where before your voices were lower, or they were mumbling voices, or you were sleeping better, and you notice over time the voices are increasing, you notice that maybe you're not sleeping as well, you notice that your depression is coming back. Um, is coming back more days than not, then those may be things that will let you know that, hey, I need to do something. I need to call someone. I need to reach out to someone. I need to talk to my doctor about making a medication adjustment if you're on medication. Because sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes you may just need a medication adjustment, or you may need to increase your time you spend with your clinical social worker or your case management team, talking, maybe to find out, okay, what's going on. And that's important for family members as well. You also want to know what your loved one's reoccurring symptoms are. Okay, you want to know what those reoccurring symptoms are so you can notice changes. So when we're talking about relapse, or which I haven't gotten to yet, but when we're talking about relapse, or a person is in a full blown psychotic episode, there are usually signs and symptoms along the way that were missed, that people didn't pay attention to, or that we minimized. So, what you want to do, you want to pay attention to if you notice that your loved one is sleeping more or not sleeping, if you notice that they're pacing more, if you notice changes. The thing is, any change you want to pay attention to, that's when you want to stop and begin to have a conversation with your loved one about what's going on with them. I'm beginning to have to talk about and to encourage them and to support them. Okay. So when we talk about reoccurring symptoms keep going until we get to the point now we're in a full blown relapse or a full blown psychotic episode or active psychotic episode. When a person is in an active psychotic episode, all of these things I talked about are harder to do. It's harder to talk about a relapse plan, developing a relapse plan. It's harder to talk about coping strategies. It's harder to talk about medications and all those types of stuff when a person is actively psychotic, because at that moment, they're actively out of touch with reality. So we want to make sure the goal is to get to intervene before the individual becomes actively psychotic, right? That's our goal. And if you're the loved one or the person there and you've seen this person on a regular basis, you're the first line, well, the second line of defense to kind of realize when something is going on. As I say this all the time, it should not be the police, especially if the person is living with family members or friends. It shouldn't be the police. The police should not be the first line of defense. If the police are the first line of defense as it relates to an individual with a severe and persistent mental illness who has been diagnosed, who has a doctor, who has a treatment team, who has family and friends, then the failure is on us as a society. The failure is not on the police. Okay, the police, of course, they do everything right in our society. Sometimes they're funded, sometimes they're not funded to do it. So they're overworked, they're doing things that really not necessarily their job, but we rely on them to do. So we want to make sure that we all chip in. So when we have something in the news where a person is killed by the police, okay? A person who is psychotic. And for whatever reason, the intervention didn't go well between that person and the police, and that person is killed. What we hear is, oh, the police need to be better trained. What we hear, the police need to, we blame the police. We forget about the number of times, and I can tell you as a clinician, being in this field for a long time, that the police, for the most part, do a good job managing psychotic individuals. So I just want to say that we hear about it when things go wrong. But let me back up. When we hear about something happens where a police had to shoot a person, or whatever the case is, a person who's actively psychotic, and as I said, the interaction didn't go well, and the person was harmed, the failure is us. Okay. Instead of asking, oh, the police need to be better trained, we need to say to ourselves, as a society, we need to be better trained. As a society, we need to put more money into mental health courts and mental health systems. As a society, we have to begin to challenge some of these legal restrictions. Okay, so we have to do that. So it's not just one group. Okay, the police didn't do this, because if this person is seeing a psychiatrist or seeing a psychologist or seeing a therapist, then the question is, what was the therapist, psychiatrist, or a mental health person was doing? Well, why? What happened? Why was there a disconnect? Okay. So again, everybody wants to play the blame game, but we can't do that. What we want to do is try to come together as a group and really kind of look at things and not wait until something happens before there's an outcry. Okay. So again, just know that when that person, let's say, pushes somebody off of the train, in front of an incoming train, and we find out that person is psychotic, or when that person drives their truck or car through a crowd of people and they kill people, and we find out that person is psychotic, that person didn't just become psychotic. Unless there, like I said, unless there was a drug issue, but that person didn't just become psychotic. Someone saw that person. Where was that person? Therapist? Did someone, when the person missed their doctor's appointment, did somebody reach out? Did somebody try to go to the person's house? What happened? Okay. When that person went to get treatment and tried to go to the hospital to get admitted, why were they turned away? Well, they were turned away. The hospital didn't have any beds. There was no money, whatever the case is. I often tell this story. I hadn't told it in a while. There was a case here where I live at, where this gentleman had murdered this young lady, and after he killed her, you could hear people are saying, "Oh, what happened to the family? What happened to this?" Everybody wanted to do the blame game. Well, the fact is, I know for a fact that the family attempted legal measures. They attempted to get guardianship. They attempted to get their loved one into the hospital. Right? These are things that the family tried to do, but because of legal loopholes, legal problems, and again, everyone has their, I don't know, everyone has their, how do I want to say it? Their corner. Okay. So you have the lawyers. Okay. They're fighting to keep the person out of the hospital. Okay. Or they're trying to protect the person's rights. Even though the person is actively psychotic, they're still charged with trying to protect the person's rights. You have the doctors who are under stress, sometimes because there's not enough beds. And then you have the family members, then you have the individuals, then you have activists. So there are a lot of different people. But the bottom line, the person isn't getting the help that they need. In America, it should not be the largest mental health system provider, should not be the jail system, because that's where we are. Okay. The jail system, the prison system is one of the largest um, warehouse for people who have a mental illness. And I don't want to say treatment because they do the best they can, but sometimes their treatment is not the best. Why is it not the best? Because it's not a hospital, it's a jail, it's a prison. Okay, so you have people who should be in an inpatient hospital, are not there. They're in prison or they're in jail because there's no place to put them. Okay, so what happens when they go there? Then they're traumatized. The staff are not able to handle them. So again, everybody's blaming everyone, but I think we need to hold our remind our politicians. Okay, I know we don't never really think about severe and persistent mental illness until there's a problem, until something happens. But I'm asking us to kind of to really begin to think about it and begin to talk to our elected officials. Talk to your elected officials. When we have elected officials, we have people running for office. Let's begin to ask, okay, what are we going to do about the mentally ill people in our community? What are we going to do about the mentally ill, our mentally ill loved ones who are on park benches, who are sleeping under the bridges, who are not because they're necessarily homeless, because they're psychotic. They don't even realize that they're under a bridge. Okay, so what are we going to do? We have to start raising the questions, the need for more mental health supports now, not when there's a problem. Okay, everybody, like I said, we want to talk about it when there's a problem between an individual and the police, or when an individual who is active psychotic murders someone. Now, let me say here, individuals with a mental illness, severe and persistent mental illness, are not necessarily violent, no more than anyone else. If anything, violence is done against them. However, an individual who is diagnosed with a severe and persistent mental illness, who is actively psychotic, and who has not taken their medication is, and they can be. So again, we have to pay attention to this. So again, I just wanted to share, because I know there are people who are listening to me who are living with a severe and persistent mental illness, and then those of you who are family members and friends, and you see it every day, and then there are those of you who are just don't live with them, but you see individuals. Okay, so everybody has to do their part. Just keep in mind, the police should be the last resort. Okay, the police should be the last resort. By the time you need to call the police, okay, the question should be, did you call, did anybody think to call the person's therapist or counselor? Did anybody think, or doctor, did anybody think to call the crisis team? Okay, a lot of places have a crisis team, a lot of places do not. Crisis teams are are teams of mental health professionals that will come out and they'll assess. And if they need to call the police, they will call the police. Now, let me tell you this, in many states, the crisis team actually works along with the police. Okay, so many times the crisis team will show up and the police may show up right behind them, or the police may call the crisis team before they get there. So that happens sometimes, right? But find out now, before you need to do, before there's a crisis, find out what's in your area. What is the crisis number in my particular area? Write that down, especially if you have a loved one with a severe and persistent mental illness. Because when we talk again, severe and persistent mental illness that runs in cycles. Okay, so an individual will have another episode. It's not a question of if, more than likely when. Okay, kind of keep that in mind. There are rare cases, but for the most part, um, it is an illness that has to be managed, and like any illness that needs to be managed, or chronic illness that needs to be managed, you're going to have fluctuations, right? So, what are you going to do the next time you have a fluctuation? Loved one, family member, okay? You want to pay attention to the signs and symptoms. You want to get to know what they are. You want to begin to try to intervene, but before it gets to the point where your loved one is actively psychotic and they're not in touch with reality. They're not listening to you. They're not hearing you, okay? You want to try to do that before. If you are a loved one, you want to try to go with your loved one to their appointment visit at least once or twice, so you can kind of talk to the team, the mental health team, and you can begin to fill out papers. So a release of information, authorization, so that they can call you if something happens, or more importantly, you can call them and say, "Hey, this is what I'm noticing." Okay, so without the paper, you can still call. Without the authorization, you can still call. They may not tell you a lot of, give you a lot of information. And again, and for those of you who are colleagues, my colleagues in mental health field, don't make it difficult for loved ones to get the support to help their loved one. Don't make it difficult, okay? We know about HIPAA, we know about confidentiality, but if you want to kind of go out of your way as much as possible. If you have that loved one with you, in your office, hey, John, are you who are you living with? Your family? Okay, John, you know what? Let's go ahead and fill out an authorization form so we can have it. You want to try to be the person. You don't want to be part of the problem. Okay, because one of the things that family members run into are colleagues of mine who don't get it, right? Who don't really understand. Okay, when a loved one is calling you for help, they're calling you help for a reason. Okay, so and if you're seeing this person every week, it's important for you and that loved one, family member, friend, whoever it is, to work together. Okay, you don't need to give, may not give all the information, but you want to be an asset. You want to be a resource. You don't want to let that loved one have to call the crisis team or call the police when that person is already receiving services from your particular clinic or receiving services from you as the doctor. Okay, so try to help. Be again, we're a team. Right. So the person with the illness, you want to try, remember to fill out paperwork to have your loved one uh, able to get information if they need it. The clinician, you want to kind of be proactive with that. And then as well as the loved one, you also too want to be proactive. Because again, calling the police should be the last resort. Okay. If we have to call the police, that means the system has failed. That's a system failure. Okay. Because the police, here's the thing. Why is it you're with your loved one all the time and this police officer is just meeting this person for the first time? Why do we think and expect that this police officer, whose first job it is not to is not a psychiatrist, is not a clinician, is not a therapist, not a mental health person? Why do we expect that person to do more and know more than we do? You're the loved one. You know your loved one better. Okay. If the person is in therapy, if the person is in treatment. Now, with that being said, yes, there are times where we will have to call the police. When you do have to call the police, you have to call 911. Ask. Okay. Let them know. I think this person is having a psychotic episode. Is there a crisis team available? You want to ask that 911. Okay. You want to ask, or you want to ask, is there an officer who is trained and mental health supports? You want to ask that, okay? And then what you want to do, if possible, you want to go out and meet the officer, okay? You don't want to just, yeah, you want to go out and try to meet the officer. You want to be the first person so you can let the officer know, okay, hey, what's going on? But here's the problem that people do sometimes. You go and meet the officer, and instead of de-escalating, you escalate the situation. Okay. You want to try to go calmly. Yes, my brother, he is not doing well, what da 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 da, whatever the case is. You don't want to go out and meet the officer, hell, well, he's not sleeping well, he's not doing this, and he's pacing the floor, and I think he's gonna hurt somebody. The officer hasn't, this is the first time they're meeting your loved one, unless it's not, but this is the first time they're meeting their loved one. So if you're already on a 10, right, you're making it seem like the person is dangerous, so that's how they're going to come in. Right. So as much as possible, you want to be calm. You want to, not escalate the situation further than you have to be. So you just want to say, hey, this is what's going on with my loved one, whatever. As much as possible, you want to be there to kind of convey, to talk, and say, hey, this is what's going on with my loved one, if you can. Again, there are times when the situation is just too volatile, and that's when we definitely need the support of the police. Because even a crisis team, if a crisis team comes out and they come without the police, if the situation is too volatile, then they are also going to call the police. So unfortunately, sometimes the police are, they're it. We're just going to have to call. And if you're a police officer, as much as possible, if the person doesn't have a weapon, okay, if the person doesn't that of, take a few minutes if you can to try to de-escalate that individual if you can. Know that the person, they may look like, and see, here's the fun illnesses, the person still has a personality. So the person may be belligerent, the person may be, not all the time the person's going to look like they're actively psychotic. It's not until afterwards you find out that something is going on. And I know for police officers, sometimes it may be hard to discern between, is this person actively psychotic, or is this person just being a butthole and giving me a hard time? Okay. And I get that. But when you're dealing with someone who is actively psychotic, just kind of keep in mind that sometimes your uniform, the police officer uniform, can be triggering, but it also can be a calming as well. Because if you as the police officer are calm, it sometimes can help to de-escalate that individual police uniform. So again, that's just something I wanted to share when I saw that. Kudos to the truckers to help and the police officers who work together to get this lady help. But I want to make sure that we all need to work together. Family members, clinicians, people who not family members, clergy. We all need to work together to get individuals who are actively psychotic help at that moment. So again, getting better all the time, mental health outreach. You can log on to our website at IGBATT, the number one, at AOL.com. Have a great day.